Okay, welcome to the third panel organized by KAIS, Korea Association of International Studies, and also sponsored by Korea Foundation. The third panel under the theme of the changing global nuclear order and nuclear proliferation. As we have known, many unexpected happenings such as the American military operation against Iranian nuclear site and the rising tension between Israel and many Middle East countries, and also never-ending continuation of the Ukraine war, and also a dramatic participation of the North Korean combat soldier to Ukraine war as well, etc. Differently from our initial expectation of the peace and stability of the era of the globalization, currently we have many, nuclear-related crises and insecure condition, not only on the Korean Peninsula but also every corner of the world. Within that circumstance, we have three excellent speakers and also leading scholars. In terms of the designated discussant. Thank you again to appreciate Korea Foundation and KAIS having such a well-designed panel and also gathering all the leading scholars in that area. From the the speaker from my left side, Dr. Kim Bo-mi at the Institute for National Security Strategy. She is a well-known nuclear expert in Korea. Okay, and Professor Lee Hak-in from Tokyo International University. He is also, expert on nuclear issues and security issues, representing from Japan. Okay, welcome to Yosu and welcome to the panel. Dr. Kim La-mi from Daniel K. Inogyu Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. I'm also excited to have Dr. Kim La-mi's presentation about the nuclear issue as well. Okay. From right side, who will be, in charge of the discussion? Dr. Chun Kyung-ju from KAIDA, the leading government-led think tanks in military issues and security issues. And Dr. Kim Min-sung, one of my favorite, scholar in the area of the U.S.-Korea relations and unification issues and nuclear issues as well, from KINU, Korea National. 잘못됐네요. From Institute National Unification. Okay, please forgive me for the typo in the book. Okay, the publication. Lastly, Professor Lee Kyung-seok from Incheon National University. He is also kind of the rising star in the area. Well, already he is established one in terms of the security and diplomatic issues as well. Okay, I will give about 15 to 10 minutes presentation for each, and please, Dr. Kim.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be presenting North Korea's strategic running in unstable nuclear order, lessons from conflicts under the shadow of nuclear weapons. Before I start, I just like to express my deep gratitude to Korea Foundation giving me this wonderful opportunity. And before I start, I have to mention this. Well, I'm here speaking as an individual researcher today, so my presentation is not representing any official views of INETS. So, my research was motivated by a growing trend in recent regional conflicts. These conflicts remain conventional in nature, but they increasingly evoke the specter of nuclear use. So this raises a quick question to me. How is North Korea interpreting and responding to this evolving security environment? So this paper especially explores how Pyongyang has recalibrated its strategy in response to the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel and Iran confrontation and India-Pakistan tensions. Although nuclear weapons have not been used in these conflicts, each case has explicitly raised the possibility of their use, thereby testing the boundaries of nuclear threshold. So I thought in this context, North Korea appears to be observing global patterns closely, drawing insight that are now informing its evolving military strategy. So now I turn to how North Korea is drawing specific lessons from today's battlefield and integrating them into its military strategy. First, North Korea has reaffirmed its absolute reliance on nuclear weapons for its regime survival. And I think the war in Ukraine offers a stark reminder. Ukraine's decision to denuclearize in the 1990s left it vulnerable to Russian aggression. And Iran's failure to establish a credible nuclear deterrent despite enriching uranium to near weapons grade has not prevented preemptive attacks by Israel on its nuclear facilities. So I believe these developments have validated Pyongyang's nuclear strategy. The regime has institutionalized this commitment by enacting new nuclear doctrine in 2022, which effectively lowered the nuclear thresholds, and by incorporating into its the constitutional amendment in 2023, which is a pledge to continuously develop, advance its nuclear forces. So nuclear weapons are no longer symbolic from North Korea's perspective. They are indispensable for deterring US-led regime change and ensuring state survival. However, this is my second point, the Ukraine war has also reinforced an equally important lesson. Wars begin and can be lost with conventional forces. The war starts with conventional forces and still continues with the conventional forces. So North Korea understands that it could be conventionally defeated before their nuclear weapons are ever deployed. Pyongyang is now reassessing the role of conventional forces, which had been neglected for a long time. At the 8th Party Congress in 2021, Kim Jong-un, he addressed the 5-year defense plan, which prioritized strategic weapons. The lessons of Russia-Ukraine war have catalyzed a clear shift in priorities. And since 2023, Kim Jong-un has made frequent and highly publicized visits to munition factories. He called for the mass production of artillery shells, modernization of sniper weapons, and the development of tactical missile systems. Mostly, these efforts support arms exports to Russia. But at the same time, the scale and symbolism support the broader ambition of DPRK. Which is the genuine modernization of North Korea's conventional forces to prepare for the 21st century warfare. Alongside these reforms, this is my third point, North Korea continues to exhibit a strong preference for short and high-intensity conflict. North Korea is structurally ill-equipped for protracted warfare, given its limited economic resilience, logistical constraints, and outdated weapon systems. Its conventional posture concentrated near the DMZ is designed for a rapid strike on Seoul, but not a prolonged campaign of war. So as the Lawrence Friedman does in his Foreign Affairs article, which I like this so much, and I highly recommend to read it, all of you. So the age of forever wars, like he said, like the states tend to pursue short wars. Quick, decisive engagement aimed at achieving objectives before escalation to nuclear wars or foreign intervention occurs. So probably, I think Kim Jong-un, he shared this logic. He may be preparing for a scenario where North Korea uses a combination of conventional forces and tactical nuclear forces in order to achieve strategic gains before outside actors can respond. The brief India-Pakistan conflict, which just happened last month, may reinforce North Korea's view that limited localized conflict causing significant but contained damage can be an effective strategy. In nearly every recent conflict involving nuclear states, the United States has emerged as a strategic mediator. This is my first point. Trump has suggested that the US will not intervene in the regional conflicts, but cases like the Russia-Ukraine war and the Indo-Pakistan crisis show that in reality, such non-involvement is difficult to sustain. North Korea is likely analyzing this pattern closely, calculating that U.S. strategic restraint near the nuclear threshold creates a narrow window for calibrated provocations. Pyongyang may believe that it could conduct limited but high-impact operations, then pivot quickly to de-escalation before the U.S. can respond militarily. This perception of U.S. predictability might increase strategic instability on the Korean Peninsula, as it increases risk-taking behavior by North Korea under the assumption that Washington will prioritize crisis management over the punishment. Finally, North Korea has recognized the growing strategic value of low-cost, high-efficiency systems, especially drones. Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb is a case in point, I think. In a single strike using 117 FPV drones, Ukraine destroyed $7 billion worth of drones, Russian aircraft, with a few $100,000 worth of drones. So India and Pakistan, they also relied heavily on one-way attack drones during their 3-day conflict. And after the ceasefire, they are accelerating developing drones. And I think North Korea is already adapting to these trends. Drone incursions into South Korea in 2022 and unveiling new platforms in 2023 suggests a strong political commitment. They released Sepyeol 4 and Sepyeol 9 drone series, along with joint development with Russia of a new type of drones, which is imported from the Iran. So indicate that Pyongyang's integration of asymmetric mass producible UAVs into its military planning. Drones are definitely attractive to North Korea because they are inexpensive, flexible, and ideal for psychological operations, and reconnaissance and precision strikes as possible, especially under the umbrella of nuclear deterrence. Here's my conclusion. I think Kim Jong-un is in the process of transforming North Korea's military form from a traditional manpower heavy force into a more professional, technologically sophisticated one, which is optimized for realities of modern combat. His evolving vision of modern warfare goes beyond just acquiring new weapons. It reflects a strategic shift, one that integrates advanced technologies, precision strike capabilities, operational mobility, and asymmetric systems such as drones. And this follows global trends, I think. And Kim Jong-un, he appears to recognize the limited utility of nuclear weapons in actual combat. While nuclear weapons remain critical for deterrence, especially at the strategic level, they are less practical for managing localized or irregular conflicts. So in response, North Korea is building a force that can operate below the nuclear threshold, yet still exert meaningful control, inflict damage. In this way, I think North Korea's military modernization represents more than a technical upgrade. It is a foundational strategic evolution aimed not just at deterring war, but at controlling, winning the limited conflicts in the future. So I will stop here. Thank you for listening.
Well, whenever they have chance, the North Korean regime identify their nuclear program in terms of their survival. okay, in terms of their survival. Both Korean government and people completely deny the logic, okay, those Korean people saying the program in terms of survival. The higher and higher tension between US and China, and also the deeper, stronger military partnership between North Korea and Russia eventually and unfortunately somehow justify North Korean logic, the nuclear program, in terms of survival. Within that context, Dr. Kim Bo-mi, she carefully analyzed the strategic intention and implication of North Korean nuclear program by making the best use of the current international crises, such as Iran-Israel confrontation and India-Pakistan conflict and etc. Okay, thank you for the very interesting presentation. Let me invite Professor Hak-in Lee under the theme of the China and the Korean Peninsula nuclear crisis, threat perceptions, narratives, and soft interventions. Okay, Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Professor Park. My topic actually would follow something just right after Dr. Kim's research regarding North Korea's capability. The reason is everyone knows that after the North Korean nuclear test, there were 6 rounds, and we have the Trump-Kim summit 2 rounds, but then nothing happened. So the situation seems to be controlled, but on the other hand, what we see here is Kim Jong-un, as Dr. Kim also mentioned as well, he would have something much more sophisticated in terms of the weapons, increasing mobility. Maybe it's a kind of combination with the nuclear tactical weapons and also with the conventional weapons here. So the question here for China is, should Beijing stop doing other things, or should Beijing seek some sort of new perspective here? And my paper actually would be composed by 3 different sections here. The first one, actually, I try to talk about the threat perceptions Beijing has changed its view regarding Pyongyang, and also more widely speaking, the Korean Peninsula. The reason here is we have much more changes regarding the geopolitical circumstances recently, and everything actually is increasing the pressure on Beijing. And then we focus to the Chinese narrative to check whether those changes in the geopolitical circumstances actually have also forced China or Beijing to change their policies. And I focus on the narrative here because the policies actually would be, much of them have been regretted by the literature. You don't have the report from the mass media as well, because most of them think that China has not done enough regarding Kim Jong-un or how to control the nuclear crisis in Pyongyang. So that's why we have to focus on the Chinese narrative. And I guess that the last one is about the soft interventions here. Many people understand that Chinese government, they would not support the Western intervention policy. So there's no economic sanctions. It is a full-scale, comprehensive economic sanctions. And China definitely would not support any regime change by military intervention. The logic behind definitely would, you know everything, I guess, that because you're in South Korea, you know that we have refugees issues. Probably if you have the regime collapse, they will go to China. And we have the studies in journal paper already. Who is going to capture those nuclear weapons first? Very likely it's China, not the United States, not South Korea. So these are the things actually how China would like to preempt the threat by doing some sort of soft interventions here. I forgot my slide actually. I have the slide here. So the sections here, I first try to focus on a very brief introduction here and then come back to the changing threat perceptions of China. And also the Chinese narrative would be in the third sections, and then we have the case studies and empirical evidence regarding the Chinese soft intervention policies towards North Korea. So everyone knows that we have the North Korean nuclear crisis here, but I focus actually would be sometime after the Trump-Kim summit, because we have no more progress. So this is the first thing here, and thereafter we see that North Korea developed their hypersonic missiles. And I guess that last year we have reports that North Korea also developed the submarine launched ballistic missile, the SLBM. And there are the things actually China would be in a kind of concern here. And more likely, I guess the literature is asking whether China has any determination to tackle the Korean nuclear crisis here. So the literature actually, they first criticize the Chinese leafage. They do not underestimate the Chinese leafage. But what they try to see here, or what they try to argue here is China cannot utilize those leafage here because if you have the collapse of the Kim Jong-un's regime, there would be, instability in the region here. You will have a lot of those problems. For example, the potential American troops next to the trans-border. And also, another category of the literature that focus on the buffer stay, or the buffer status within North Korea. China may want to keep North Korea regimes safe, in the sense that you can have some sort of distance between the American, or let's say South Korean, American, Japanese influence in the Korean peninsula. And we also have another categories of the literature. They focus on alliance and the dilemma here. More likely, those people in the literature, they argue that because of the existing alliance between Japan, South Korea, and the United States, then China cannot easily just give up North Korea. And right now, I guess that you can also add another factor, which is about Russia, North Korea, and China. So the last category of the literature, actually, they talk about the Chinese discontent, which, again, would be or have been neglected by the Western literature. Not many people focus on it. We have one of the Chinese scholars already in 2008. He discussed about the Chinese views on the North Korean nuclear crisis, and he argues that nuclear deterrence is now becoming much more irrelevant. So you're not going to deter other people simply with the nuclear weapons here. And he also asked why China would have to tolerate the North Korean regime. And we also have another scholar in 2016. He discussed a lot regarding why Xi Jinping would change the foreign policy towards North Korea. I guess that most of you would understand that both leaders, Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un, they came to power in 2012. But the first time that they met, do you remember which year? That's already 2018. That would be right before we have the Trump-Kim summit. So the two countries' relationship is not something we have expected. They're not that intimate. And most of the time, it seems like Xi Jinping lost control over North Korea. So the scholar argues that you should have China to change the policy towards North Korea. And we also have some people argues that China should do much more because of that image as a responsible rising power in the region here. But then the puzzle here I have in the paper is why China would have to change that policy. But more importantly, why no people talk about those changes regarding the Beijing's new policy here? I guess the policy changes in China have been neglected, if not under-evaluated most of the time here, because they think that China is a kind of protector to North Korea, so that's the problem. And you can also see from the picture here, this is the Chinese special envoy to North Korea. And he did many things, but definitely BBC, CNN, the Western mass media, they're not going to report what he did actually. Then we have another question here. For many people, I guess they come from the West or from, Korea, they would question regarding China, is China actually wholeheartedly supporting the denuclearizations in Korean Peninsula? So basically the paper that I'm going to present here deal with these two questions. And then we have a very brief introduction here. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but the first thing, we have to understand why China would think this is a kind of threat if you cannot control North Korea. So it's about the threat perceptions changes here. But I guess that my limitation of the paper right now is I cannot focus something about the new president in South Korea. So most of the case studies actually would be, at the time regarding Yoon, or even go back to some time earlier. So this is something I cannot really come up with, maybe later. So that would be the changes of the Chinese threat perceptions here. And how could they describe, understand, and also carry out the policy regarding the nuclear issue in North Korea. And thereafter, I will evaluate the soft intervention policy. So the threat perceptions here, I guess we have two persons. They somehow change the Chinese threat perceptions in Korean Peninsula. One is Donald Trump, and then the second one is Russia. So if I put it something very, plainly, I would say that the threat China perceived in the past simply is single. This is about the threat from North Korea. But now because of the issue has not been solved, then you have the United States, no matter this is, Obama, Joe Biden, and Trump, they somehow enhance their cooperation with South Korea and also perhaps Japan. So this imposed much more pressure on China. You can name that you have the THAAD, which make Beijing get mad. And you also have the potential, perhaps, what we call the Indo-Pacific Alliance in the East Asian region here. Well, that's another chance to China. And then you come back to Russia. They have the treaty with North Korea. So it means that China is now no longer the only country that can talk and communicate with North Korea. It dilutes the influence of China. So these are the rapid changes of the geopolitical circumstances in the region. And the United States, actually, I will put this into two factors here. The first one is the Indo-Pacific strategy. THAAD actually has now been part of that issue, incorporated into that Indo-Pacific norms and perspective here. I guess that everyone would be, much more in knowledge than me. Then we have the increasing cooperation, alliances, exercise between the state, South Korea, and Japan. And last year, 2024, we have the largest numbers of troops involved in the South Korea, United States military exercise. We have also the largest numbers of airplanes regarding Japan and also the state we got on that exercise here. So these are the things actually China fears that in the coming future that Indo-Pacific strategy seems to be something targeting only North Korea, but definitely that would be something on China in the coming future. And we have another issue about the extent deterrence. I guess that the keynote speaker would be, very optimistic. But the extent deterrence that I have found, not only in the literature, but also in the newspaper in South Korea, I guess that the United States make Japan and South Korea quite painful. You don't have any commitment from Trump in the first term. They would say that South Korea, Japan, you can go nuclear. And thereafter, you have Abe talks about nuclear sharing. And we have the Washington Declaration signed with South Korea and also the state. But then I guess that the next day or the next day, you have the clarification from the White House regarding we have no nuclear sharing with South Korea. We have no, let's say, nuclear joint exercise with South Korea, which really disappoints South Korean government and the people. And thereafter, we have a news. I guess this is something last month. It's not from Trump, but Joe Biden, before he stepped down, he put South Korea into the restrictions list regarding the technologies that they can access into US laboratories. And I guess that there are more interpretations regarding why Joe Biden would try to put South Korea into that restrictions list as an ally, right? And then you have the second term here, I guess that we see a lot of cases regarding what happened now. For example, how's the state tackle Iran? And I guess the question here is, what about Korea? Or let's say Korean Peninsula here. And would Trump do something similar? When Trump failed to commit the extent deterrence towards South Korea and Japan, then what would the state do, right? So that would be another concern for those, let's say, involved parties. But this is also something where we're studying studies here. I guess that there are at least 4 or 5 articles after 2018 and 19, but the latest one actually in 2024, there's a South Korean scholar. He published an article on the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and he said that don't take it for granted regarding the South Koreans' nuclear silence. They're asking for the extent deterrence, but they couldn't get it. And then you have another actual survey published by the journal paper. South Korean people, those who interviewed, they have the highest percentage rate regarding whether their country should have extent deterrence or whether the country should have nuclear weapons. Among with other countries, including Indonesia, including Japan, South Korea has the highest rating in that study. So I guess the picture is quite clear. As we can also see that we have the follow-up from the 4 regarding the keynote speech. How can the United States really convince South Korean people that you would be safe, you would be protected, right? But the things here actually would be the nightmare for China. If South Korea go nuclear, Japan will also go nuclear. So this is the nightmare for China. They don't want to see something like this happen. So anyway, we got something like from Russia regarding, let's say, Putin. So basically, basically that treaty somehow diluted the influence of China because they now have another alternative. Russia can be alternative to China in terms of energy cooperations and defense cooperations here. We can expect that Pyongyang will be much tougher in the coming future. And definitely, I guess that Kim Jong-un will try to play a kind of balancing game between Russia and China. So it means that China is no longer the only country that can influence North Korea. And perhaps China would be very, very unhappy with that. But so far, we haven't found much let's say, responses from China, perhaps for some reasons, but I mean, I just put it aside for a while. But the preemptive strike, something similar to the case of Iran, I guess is quite complicated now because you have the support from Russia, and China may not also want to see this happen. So this is something making the whole Korean peninsula much more complicated than before. So we have also the potential NATO in East Asia, which one of the former CIA director in the state, he predicted in the coming future this is going to be another problem for China because once you have the enhancement of those exercise cooperation between Japan and South Korea, then very likely China will suffer. So the narrative in China, they changed it basically because of the, development of the Korean peninsula. For example, in the past, we have the six-party talks. But after 2013 here, we have the continuous US, let's say, military exercise here. We have one scholar from China. She is one of those delegations in the six-party talks, and I got a chance to interview her day back 2017. I cannot quote what she told me, but I have another way to, have this because it's published in the Chinese article here. She said that in order to curb the development of China, the US has pushed for development of THAAD in ROK, South Korea, with the excuse of responding to the DPRK nuclear threat. And basically, it means the US is making use of the excuse in North Korea to contain China. And China would say that THAAD actually upset their own national security and Russia as well. And then they start criticizing the US is the source of the problem rather than North Korea. And then you have the Chinese special envoy, and then I quote from him, he said that the US always blames DPRK for causing tensions, but there's another reason that is worth looking. We see the reason as stimulating from the US conducting such major military exercise here. The second, a very important cause of instability on the Korean peninsula, and for the Korean peninsula becoming an issue is that the United States has not paid due attention to the DPRK's concerns in the field of security and has imposed sanctions here. So these are the things actually no Western mass media would focus. These are the things actually no one would pay attention to it because they think that China is making use of their own reasons, justifications to protect North Korea. But I think this is actually the root of the problem here. And then you will have more exercise from South Korea, Japan, the state, and then you will have more exercise also from North Korea. So China actually see this is what we call the vicious cycle here. And they address that, used to talk, both the state and also North Korea. So for time constraint here, let me just skip to something regarding the soft interventions China do or has done so far towards North Korea. So this is the picture actually the first time that Xi Jinping visited Pyongyang as a state visit after he put Kim Jong-un back on track. I guess that you still remember that in the Trump-Kim summit, before the Trump-Kim summit, Kim Jong-un, he flew to Beijing and then he dropped looks in front of Xi Jinping. And Xi Jinping promised a lot of things, North Korean economic development here, the project, or even security, safety, that kind of stuff. So the measurement here I try to use here would be the soft intervention policy. So basically, China is not going to have any military intervention. China is not going to have any high-level comprehensive economic sanctions. But then they can make use of the economic manipulations and also the diplomatic persuasions to force or to encourage North Korea to change the course of their policy. So this is sometime before 2019 here, and you can see we have a lot of those economic encouragement policy, current state policy from China, and also the diplomatic persuasions as well. But something later, after 2019, you can see that we still have the same pattern here. Apologize, I cannot go into the cases in detail here, But you can see that we still have the subtle diplomacy between China and North Korea, the state, Japan, South Korea. But again, no mass media, no academic papers focus on those issues here. If you screen analyze into those statements in the Chinese Foreign Ministry, you will know that they have done many things, but no one actually pay attention to the Chinese effort because China hasn't yet offered anything concrete, but they keep communications here. So forgive me, I have only 1 minute left. My analysis actually would be China is doing the soft intervention here, but it's not something very effective and successful here. And definitely, I guess the problem here is, for the Chinese perspective, it's not something their own problem. It's the problem of the United States and also North Korea, which China suffer ultimately. But as long as you have the communication between China and North Korea, you can have dialogue. You can have your influence on North Korea. That would be something actually you can, put the agenda forward perhaps later. Something else here, I guess that unless we will have another nuclear test, China will still continue that policy gradually and see what will happen. So this is really, in 10 seconds, the conclusion here is, I would talk about that very ineffective soft intervention policy, but they still have a role to play. I want to draw attention to something regarding the future here because we have the new president from South Korea, and someone called that he is a kind of pragmatic realist. But I guess that the problem here is he has to deal with different countries, including not only China, but also Japan and also the United States. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for sharing Chinese view and concern about the North Korean nuclear program and American administration's approach to East Asia, in particular under the theme of the Indo-Pacific strategy, and also, Chinese concern about the way how you think regarding, the country's security cooperation among Korea, Japan, and the U.S., etc., etc. Well, let me clarify that. Yes, as you carefully mentioned, after the diplomatic normalization between Korea and China in 1992, the two countries' diplomatic relation has dramatically developed. Okay, at the same time, substantial number of the Korean people, has been quite disappointed by regarding the Chinese government's relatively unclear position about North Korean nuclear program. And about South Korean public's idea about having South Korean independent nuclear program or independent nuclear potential, whatever we may say, we may call. Actually, it was about 60 to 65% in terms of the South Korean public poll, whether how much South Korean ordinary people interested in having nuclear potential. If we narrow down the poll only to the experts such as policymakers or scholars who are supporting the independent nuclear potential of South Korea, is only about 20 to 25%. And immediately after April 70 years announcement of the U.S. South Korea, the summit in Washington, D.C., both the public and the experts support having independent nuclear potential dramatically dropped as well. So currently about 40 to 45% of the general public, they are, according to the poll, supporting, independent nuclear potential. And also the answer is quite, very different what kind of question we are supposed to give. Okay. Anyway, thank you sharing Chinese concern and the perspective about, the security circumstances in East Asia. Okay. Let's invite Dr. Professor Kim La-mi from the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies under the idea about America's new nuclear strategy and its implications for the global nuclear order. Okay, Dr. Kim?
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, it is a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Kais and President Kim Tae-young for inviting me here today. I've been asked to speak on America's new nuclear strategy and its implications for global security. And at this point, the direction of U.S. nuclear strategy and policy remain unclear because we are only 5 months into the Trump administration. And no formal strategy has been released, no nuclear policy review has been out yet. But another major source of unpredictability and uncertainty is President Trump's unpredictability. So far, the administration has sent out mixed signals suggesting a range of possible directions it might pursue. So I will highlight some of the most consequential policy choices that the administration may consider. But before I begin, I should note that I speak for myself, not for the U.S. Department of Defense or the U.S. government. So I think that I will begin with the administration's non-proliferation policy in light of its recent strikes against Iran. The Trump administration's non-proliferation policy has oscillated between engagement and coercive counter-proliferation. On one hand, it pursued diplomacy with North Korea back in 2018 and 2019. And although President Trump withdrew from the Iran deal during his first term, he recently engaged with Iran to address Iran's nuclear program. On the other hand, the administration has shown unwillingness to consider or use military force. In 2017, I'm sure you remember that Trump contemplated surgical military strikes against North Korea's nuclear and missile sites, the so-called bloody nose option. And just last week, it carried out targeted strikes against Iran's enrichment facilities. So this move was particularly striking because of President Trump's traditionally non-interventionist policy and also the policy preferences of his base. So shortly before the attack, a survey showed that nearly 60% of his supporters opposed military strikes on Iran, with fewer than 20% in support. It remains unclear, however, whether coercive counter-proliferation will become a consistent feature of the administration's non-proliferation strategy or whether it would apply to the same approach to North Korea. Of course, the two cases are very different. Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons yet, while North Korea does. And furthermore, in the case of Iran, Israel launched the initial strike, and it is uncertain whether Washington would have attacked Iran alone. That said, a common thread in both cases is President Trump's tendency toward a maximalist approach. Back in 2019, when the Hanoi summit collapsed, Trump pushed for a comprehensive big deal rather than the incremental step-by-step arrangements. And in the lead up to last week's strikes, Trump reportedly demanded that Iran dismantle all of its enrichment facilities. And this is a demand that Tehran would have never accepted. So this maximalist instinct may continue to shape the U.S.'s non-proliferation policy. And another pattern might be when engagement fails, President Trump appears to become frustrated and impatient, and then get more inclined to consider the use of force. And now President Trump is reaching out to North Korea once again. This engagement, if happens, it will carry out risks if it falters. Regarding the administration's stance on extended deterrence, we already talked a lot about it today. Dr. Vipin Narang shared his view about the U.S. government's resolve to protect its allies. You may agree or disagree with that statement. At the end of the day, we don't really know what the President of the United States would do, but I will focus on the messaging that this administration is, sending out. And I'm sure you've been following this carefully, but the credibility of extended deterrence has been waning, especially in Europe. President Trump has been making it very clear that the United States will not defend European countries that quote-unquote, do not pay their fair shares. And a lot of European countries are very concerned about it. But at the summit, NATO summit that is going on, European allies finally agreed to increase its defense budget to 5% of GDP by 2035. But this approach has been making European allies very concerned. The Trump administration's stance on defending its Indo-Pacific allies has been a little bit different. At least rhetorically, back in February, President Trump reaffirmed the U.S.'s commitment to defending Asian allies, namely South Korea and Japan. However, as previous panelists already mentioned, South Koreans are very concerned about the credibility of extended deterrence, the U.S.'s security commitment, because of what President Trump said before and what the Secretary of Defense for Policy, Albert Colby, said. I'm not going to talk too much about that, as you already know. And this messaging coming out of the administration has serious consequences. Already, countries in Europe, like Germany and Poland, are openly debating whether to acquire nuclear weapons, and South Koreans as well. But actually, according to recent polls, actually, the numbers that I saw recently is that, over 75%, close to 76% of South Koreans support nuclear weapons since President Trump was sworn in. Turning to U.S. policy on deterring its peer competitors, there have been conflicting signals. Shortly after taking office, President Trump suggested the possibility of arms control negotiations with both Russia and China. He said that the world already has too many nuclear weapons, enough nuclear weapons to destroy itself 100 times over. Why do we have to spend so much money in maintaining and expanding nuclear arsenal? We should all cut our defense budget in half by decreasing the number of nuclear warheads. At the same time, however, there are strong indications that the administration is leaning toward nuclear expansion rather than reduction. Despite efforts to reduce the budget deficit, the Trump administration has proposed the largest defense budget in history, with a significant portion expected to go toward nuclear modernization. Moreover, Project 2025 and key Republican leaders on the Senate Armed Services Committee have publicly advocated for expanding the nuclear arsenal. And the rationale behind this push is that now the United States must be prepared to deter both Russia and China simultaneously. So currently, there is a sort of a strategic equilibrium between the United States and Russia, with each side possessing about 4,000 nuclear weapons, give or take a few hundred. However, China is rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal. It currently has over 500 or close to 600 nuclear warheads, and Moscow and Beijing have been getting increasingly close. And so this makes some Americans concerned that the United States would soon find itself with fewer nuclear weapons than Russia and China combined. That said, effective nuclear deterrence doesn't require nuclear parity or numerical parity. What matters is a secure second strike capability, which the United States already has vis-a-vis Russia and China, even if China continues to expand its nuclear arsenal, and even if the two countries fight with the United States simultaneously. For this reason, the marginal utility of expanding the U.S. nuclear arsenal appears limited. In fact, doing so could be counterproductive, likely reigniting a new arms race. Russia will also have to expand its own nuclear arsenal, and China may also have to, increase its nuclear arsenal even further, thereby undermining strategic stability. But still remains unclear whether the Trump administration will move to expand the number of nuclear warheads. But what is clear is its push to expand missile defense systems under the initiative called the Golden Dome, obviously inspired by the Iron Dome, Israel's Iron Dome. This effort signals the administration is pursuing a strategy aimed at denying adversaries the ability to strike the U.S. homeland with nuclear weapons, rather than accepting mutual vulnerability, in which the threat of mutual assured destruction assures deterrence. However, the technical feasibility of the Golden Dome initiative remains highly questionable. It's supposed to be very expensive, and even if it actually works technically. But also the risks are more tangible. It could prompt adversaries to develop countermeasures and incentivize Russia and China to develop their countermeasures, leading to another layer of nuclear arms race. Another policy direction that the administration may pursue is the further expansion of tactical nuclear weapons. Trump's 2018 nuclear posture review already advocated for this, leading to the deployment of new low-yield nuclear warheads. The rationale was to enhance the credibility of U.S. deterrence by making nuclear use more thinkable at lower thresholds, particularly in battlefields, because it's not entirely credible to say that we're going to use nuclear weapons for small-scale conflicts. But the expansion of tactical nuclear weapons carries significant risks. It could incentivize other countries to follow suit. South Korea also is concerned about North Korea's development of tactical nuclear weapons. And the spread of tactical nuclear weapons, expansion of tactical nuclear weapons would lower the threshold for nuclear conflict, which has already been weakened by Russia's recent nuclear saber rattling by threatening to use tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine. So rather than enhancing stability, such moves could increase the likelihood of escalation in future conflicts. Lastly, there is speculation that the administration may consider resuming nuclear testing. The United States has refrained from nuclear testing since 1992, although it has signed but not ratified the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, but it has nonetheless abided by this treaty by refraining from nuclear testing. However, Project 2025 calls for the Department of Energy to significantly shorten the timeline required for nuclear testing to 6 months from current 36 months currently. And some advocate that testing is necessary to ensure the reliability of American, especially newer nuclear warheads. But I believe that resuming nuclear testing is unnecessary for maintaining the credibility of U.S. nuclear arsenal. I cannot imagine any country going to nuclear war with the United States just because some of nuclear weapons in America may not work. But testing would add little value to deterrence, but the cost could be significant. Potentially, this could be a violation of the Outer Space Treaty that bans the deployment of WMD and also bans weaponization of space. Other countries may also try to weaponize this outer space for military purposes, and also it would significantly erode the long-standing norm of refraining from nuclear testing. So at this stage, much of what I've discussed remains speculative, rooted in what President Trump did during his first term and what he and his advisors have said more recently. So we'll have to wait and see how the administration's nuclear policy unfolds in practice. So I will stop here, and I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Kim Lami. It was very meaningful presentation to understand second Trump administration's nuclear policy, who are facing many global, security crises in Europe, Middle East, and East Asia, etc. Okay, it's time to have discussion. So Dr. Jeon Kyung-ju and Dr. Kim Min-sung and Professor Lee Kyung-seok, you may have about 10 minutes respectively for the specific discussion, and also you may expand your discussion on the Korean issue as well. Okay, please, Dr. Jeon Kyung-ju.
Hi, my name is Kyung-ju Jeon. I'd like to thank KAIS and Korea Foundation for having me this great opportunity to share thoughts on this important issue with excellent scholars. I think Dr. Kim's paper is the first paper that embraced the very latest conflict in the Middle East, as well as the war in Ukraine. I think we have many papers about lessons learned from the war in Ukraine, but they often mixed and spread out lessons at strategic, tactical, operational level without differentiation. But I really like Dr. Kim's paper because she focused more strictly on strategic aspects on what North Korea learned about modern warfare from specific wars. But I have some minor thoughts and suggestions that might help enhance the quality of the paper. I'd like to share my comments related to the contents and arguments first, and then move on to comments on more related to the structure or composition of the paper. I'd like to go into the paper according to the items you suggested. First, your item regarding nuclear weapons as an indispensable deterrent. I'd like to suggest you to reconsider whether Russia's nuclear doctrine, escalate to de-escalate, played in the war in Ukraine. Because if I'm not mistaken, escalate to de-escalate means the use of nuclear weapons in response to any non-nuclear assault on Russian territory. So the war in Ukraine was not a situation where Russia needs to apply the doctrine. And what Russia did in Ukraine was nuclear saber rattling, but not actual nuclear use. So if it had really been applied, it should have actually used limited nuclear weapons. And your second point, the crucial role of conventional forces. I strongly agree that North Korea realized the crucial role of conventional capabilities. And Kim Jong-un might thought that even a lot of nuclear weapons do not help deterring, winning, and ending a war. So you included many observations about Kim Jong-un's emphasis on munitions factory, but I would like to suggest you to include Kim Jong-un's speech at the military parade in April 2022 for a celebration of the 19th founding anniversary of the Korean People's Army, because that was right after the war in Ukraine began, when he emphasized the capacity of sustaining military operations, war-fighting capability, and motor of the military force other than weapons per se. And my third point regarding a strong preference for short-term conflict. I was very glad to see Friedman's piece in your paper, but actually I got very different implications from Dr. Kim's. As Friedman mentioned, I think from the war in Ukraine, North Korea might realize that it is not really easy ending a war very promptly as it planned, and feel the necessity to have a plan B. So I think the modernization of conventional capability is also part of preparation for a protracted war, plan B. So the war in Ukraine has not only reinforced North Korea's strong preference for short-term conflict, but also made Kim Jong-un feel the necessity to prepare for inadvertent escalation and protracted war. And I have three more comments on more related to the structure or composition of the paper. I'd like to suggest you to make more clear about the time frame or the words covered in the paper. You mentioned war in the Middle East, very recent one, but actually you also mentioned the war in several years ago. So I want you to recommend the words you take into account more specifically, only consider two words which were recent ones. And I also suggest you to identify difference among two conflicts and potential one on the Korean Peninsula, especially the conventional and nuclear balance between the two parties, because they are totally different. So I suggest you to put those differences at the earlier part of the paper before you deep dive into the lessons. And my third point is I would like to suggest you to reconsider U.S. intervention part to be included. I understand that you included that part, but I think it is quite different from other parts of the paper because the rest of the paper focuses on more implications of modern warfare and military development. So that are my comments, and I really like Dr. Kim. She's my favorite colleague, and I really enjoyed reading this paper. Thank you.
Okay, well, relatively, Dr. John, she raised many interesting comments and questions. Dr. Bomi Kim, let me expect you are very productive and efficient response later. Okay. 이따가 하세요. Dr. Kim Min-sung.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Min-sung Kim, a research fellow at the Korea Institute for National Unification, KINO. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to both KAIS and Korea Foundations for having me as a discussant to both in this meaningful panel with great panelists, including the moderator here. And I was asked to take part in a discussion about Professor Lee's paper on Chinese perspectives and ways of engagement on North Korean nuclear issues. I found it quite enjoyable and learned some insights, but as a discussant, I'd like to offer the 3 comments on this paper, addressing 2 issues in terms of content, and the last one is in terms of the structure. The first one is about the Chinese threat perceptions. This paper has a very interesting declarative sentence that North Korea's nuclear threat is no longer a mere nightmare for China related to the Korean Peninsula issue. And Professor Lee explained that Chinese threat perceptions have changed with a greater concern directed toward the broader context of regional security environment when considering how Chinese threat perceptions are changing. So according to his explanation, actually he raised a lot of the issues, but I will try to rearrange as best as I can. The 3 key developments stand out. The first one is about the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, which targets China and has fostered the stronger U.S.-Japan security cooperation. And second, there are questions surrounding the credibility and assurance issues of the U.S. extended deterrence, which have fueled public support for the potential nuclear armament in both South Korea and Japan, which make China insecure. And the third one is the growing ties between Russia and North Korea, which further complicate the regional security the landscape. However, despite these recent changes, it is important to recognize the persistent concerns and increasing threat perception in South Korea, Japan, and the United States as well in this paper regarding the North Korea's nuclear program. North Korea's arsenal now includes a variety of delivery systems, including the ICBMs, targeting the U.S. mainland, and an expanded array of tactical nuclear weapons. In fact, we know that there have been previous attempts to do the trilateral cooperations before, such as TCOG in 1998, TISA in 2014, but these efforts have not been that sustained well. And this raises very important questions. Why does the current trilateral security cooperations appear to have a stronger motivations and a greater potential for institutionalizations in response to the North Korea's nuclear challenge? And what factors are driving this renewed commitment? This should be the basic point to keep in mind to strike a balance to evaluate issues related to the North Korean nukes as well as the Chinese threat perceptions in this paper. And in the case of the possibility of North Koreans, nuclear armament in South Korea and Japan, it is true that the public confidence in the U.S. extended deterrence remains a key factor in deterring nuclear armament possibility in South Korea. However, North Korea's increasingly aggressive nuclear postures, such as its advanced capabilities and its clear intentions to be recognized as a de facto nuclear weapons state throughout the revisions, its laws and constitutions, and its strong willingness to consider even the preemptive nuclear usage under certain conditions based upon the subjective judgments. This kind of the nuclear posture has led to growing public sentiment in South Korea that the nuclear threats must be met with a nuclear deterrence by our own capabilities. Therefore, there should be underlying issues influencing this kind of overall the sentiment. So it is essential for the Professor Lee to analyze Chinese threat perceptions in a way that fully accounts for North Korea's nuclear behavior, rather than treating this North Korean part as a secondary concern. So to persuade the readers, there should be some more comprehensive evaluations. Personally, I believe that from the Chinese perspective, the most crucial factor related to its threat perceptions about the North Korean nuclear issues as well as the Korean Peninsula is the Russia-DPRK tie. The China should be attentive to North Korea's evolving foreign and security policy, specifically the apparent strategic shift from a China-DPRK alliance, which was the strongest tie for the past decades, toward the closure of Russia-DPRK ties. While North Korea continues to rely on the China for economic support, it is actively seeking new opportunities throughout its deepening relationship with Russia, including the military and economic cooperations. The cooperation agenda is getting bold and more specified. The development could diminish Chinese influence, Chinese leverages over North Korea, and alter the regional balance of power, and potentially prompting the US-Japan to further strengthen the trilateral security cooperation which the China has concerned. So ultimately, while the paper aims to highlight the nuclear issues on the Korean Peninsula by linking the North Korea's programs to the broader context, all the related to nuclear agendas, there should be some kind of more balanced perspective is necessary. The second one is, I think the most interesting part is about this paper is about the Chinese soft intervention approach to North Korea, why it was emerged and how has it developed. Based upon the provided definitions, the Chinese soft intervention has focused on the economic manipulations and the diplomatic persuasions rather than economic sanctions and the military coercive measures. However, it has been failed, as the Professor Lee analyzed in the paper, to make North Korea give up its nuclear weapons program. And it is true that there have been times when Chinese influence over the Kim Jong-un regime did not work well, as Professor Lee mentioned, such as the beginning, the period of the Kim Jong-un's leadership and the period of the COVID with the closure of its borders. Also, but at the same time, I don't think China has always stuck to the soft intervention approach. China also played a key role by voting in favor of tougher sanctions at the UN Security Council in 2016 and 2017. So to evaluate the soft intervention approach, it seems more important to understand why China has the different tactics under the so-called soft intervention approach. Why China supported the economic sanctions regimes before, then opposed them, and what about the current development supporting the North Korea explicitly, as shown in the recent joint declaration of China-Russia summit. So as written in the article, it might be questionable whether this soft intervention approach has been effective to deal with the tough or aggressive position of North Korea. If so, why China had to stick to this approach? What are the variables to make China stay in this approach? Of course, the Chinese message regarding the importance of negotiations and dialogues, not just for the South Korea and the United States, but also for North Korea. If so, is there any alternatives that the Professor Lee could provide regarding the Chinese considerations to deal with North Korean nuclear issues? So maybe these questions go to the Professor Lee later on. Last but not least, the structural issues. I heard that the Professor Lee has a plan to improve this paper. So I think the current paper suggests the Chinese threat perception, narratives, soft interventions, which are all relevant issues, but they are written in it seems like in parallel rather than directly connected to each other. So it would be more productive for the readers to focus on the discussions and changes in Chinese approach. So just focusing on the concept, evaluation, and prospects of the soft interventions approach. Because Chinese threat perceptions and the development of its narratives could be very significant variables to ultimately make China design and shape its approach to deal with North Korea. So restructuring kind of the logical development could make this paper have more focal points and create more impressive insights for the readers regarding the Chinese perspectives. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim Min-sung. Thank you for the very precise discussion. Let me invite Dr. Lee Kyung-seok.
Good afternoon. I'm Kyung-seok Lee at the International University. It is my great pleasure and honor to be here. I would like to thank KIS and KF to hosting this wonderful conference with phenomenal presenters and discussants. Professor Lee's paper is not a research paper. It's more like a policy-oriented paper. So I'm trying to flesh out my brief considerations, speculation about the current global nuclear order. And I will link my thoughts to raising questions to Professor Kim. So I think it's really important to figure out the third wave of nuclear order right now. And my understanding is, so there's a first wave during the Cold War period, and there's a second wave of nuclear order after the collapse of the Iron Curtain, and now we have been facing the third nuclear wave. And my understanding, to characterize the third wave, it's linked to the relative United States hegemonic decline. The reason why I'm asking about and talking about the US hegemonic decline is there's a key understanding about the United States' willingness and capability to maintain and sustain the global nuclear order that has persisted so far. So in that sense, we have to think about it, and as Professor Kim flashed out in a paper, there are two different dimensions. One is the United States nuclear strategy towards China and Russia, and another really important kind of part is the United States nuclear strategy in terms of non-proliferations. So when we first think about the United States nuclear strategy to the key competitors like Moscow and Beijing, there can be two different kind of approaches. One is the arms control and one is the nuclear expansions. But the key question about this is, in thinking about United States nuclear strategy, it's about the resource allocations. I mentioned about the United States relative decline means United States want to keep match to key competitors, but about the willingness and the capability, there's discrepancies relative to the Cold War era and in the early and the late 20th centuries. So here about the resource allocation problem, there could be two approaches: the arms control approach and the nuclear expansion approach, and that's what Professor Kim fleshed out in a paper. So about the arms control perspective, my question is, what about the intention of Moscow and Beijing? Are they really willing to accept the arms control? If they want to come to the negotiation table, this is the first kind of questions. And if Moscow and Beijing just want to keep the nuclear accelerations, then the nuclear arms control, the wishful thinking from Washington may not be working in the future. And then there's another perspective. If the nuclear arms control approach fails, there's a nuclear expansion issues. And then, Professor Kim mentioned the details policy options. For example, the nuclear testing, the nuclear test resumptions, more building the nuclear modernizations, the tactical nuclear weapons development. Then what is the priority? And she mentioned in the paper we have to think about the estimated cost. From the resource allocation perspective, what is the most priority from United States they can choose if United States wants to expand the nuclear capability? What are the criteria and what are the standards? And this is the questions, and another one that really comes off my mind is about the strategic capability, the strategic stability between Moscow, Washington, and Beijing. So I think the assumption that Professor Kim had in a paper is Moscow and Beijing are totally on the same ground in terms of the match United States nuclear capability. But what if there's a growing or conflicting interest between Moscow and Beijing? Then is it really reasonable, or what is the alternative that United States can maintain the strategic stability with Moscow or Beijing? Or it could be another scenario that Washington think about the individual strategic stability between Moscow and Washington and Washington and Beijing. And what is the strategy, and how can United States really handle the strategic stability? And this is another really important kind of factors that we have to think about Washington's nuclear strategies towards the key competitors. Then let's move on to the nuclear proliferation kind of policies. My key understanding is that the nuclear proliferation kind of regime is really an idiosyncratic domain that the great powers cooperated, especially during the Cold War era, and it was really successful. So in the Cold War era, United States and the Soviet Union, they have a really close relationship and really prevent the nuclear proliferations. But after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, the nuclear proliferation regime, there's a growing kind of problem that the commitment from the Russian side to keep the nuclear proliferation regimes. So the evidence about this, it's when we think about the threat of nuclear proliferations mainly comes from the authoritarian regimes. And then the follow-up question is, then what was the role from the main flagship countries, Russia and China, to prevent the nuclear developments in the authoritarian regimes? And what was the influence that Washington can control or moderate the Moscow's kind of intention or behavior to control this nuclear proliferations? So from this kind of the growing kind of crack between Washington and Moscow, it's actually a serious challenge to maintain the current nuclear proliferation regimes. So the main critiques from the Democratic sides is that United States wants to keep the nuclear proliferation regimes, which is, I think, it's really good, but it really controls the democratic allies. It cannot really control the authoritarian regimes that want to pursue the nuclear weapons. And what was the influence or the control to a cooperation with Moscow and Beijing to keep the nuclear proliferation regimes? From this kind of structural kind of problem and understanding, we have to think about it, and then the next questions comes from the threat and the problem from the allied nuclear proliferations. And here another kind of my point, when we think about the nuclear proliferation kind of regime and my understanding about the United States' relative decline, it's about the credibility of extended deterrence. So Professor V.P. Narang mentioned it has a really robust intentions about to secure and protect the US allies. I understand that, I buy the intentions, but the key problem comes from the capability and the real mechanisms. How can United States really assure the United States allies? So and the one example is about this. There's this Washington Declaration in 2023 April, and I know it's a historical event. The NCG, it's the phenomenon kind of bilateral negotiation institutions between Washington and Seoul. But when you think about the detailed kind of operations, the detailed components, then still there's a question marks from South Korea. And let's zoom out, not only the South Korean people. So there's the credibility problem about the extended deterrence really links to the United States grand alliance politics. So the defense budget issues, the America First kind of issues, the United States broad alliance politics, it's really closely linked to the United States credibility problem, but it's not just a separate issues. From that sense, there's also a growing question mark from the United States allies that is the extended deterrence really credible. In that sense, I think the non-proliferation kind of questions, the proliferation issues will kind of continue not only in the Trump second administrations, but after the administrations. And from that point, so I think it's really too important, and I want to link to my thoughts to Professor Kim's paper, and my question is, she said about the mixed signal, the uncertainties about the Trump second administrations, the nuclear policies, and what is the priorities? This is my key questions. And what is the fundamental directions to compete the nuclear competitors, not only in the Trump administration, but after the futures? And also, my really key question is, what is the more robust and the mechanism or tool that the United States really can assure that the US allies, especially like Poland, Ukraine, or Germany, for example, in the European countries, or South Korea, for example, in Korea, about to really assure the US allies and dampen their proliferation motivations. I will stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Thank you for another very interesting discussion. Based on all the interesting comments and questions, discussions, I'm very curious what the speakers have for your answers. Okay, Dr. Kimbomi?
Oh, I'll be really quick. Thank you so much for Dr. John's comment on my paper, and she 4 minutes? Okay, she definitely read through my whole paper. Thank you so much. Well, you mentioned about the Russia's strategy escalate to de-escalate. I also mentioned in my paper, I added that part because I wanted to say Russia used this strategy to deter NATO's intervention. So I thought North Korea might gotten similar idea. So probably North Korea wants to coerce South Korea, and with the threat of nuclear weapons, they are not going to use the nuclear weapons against South Korea, but like they are threatening South Korea with the nuclear weapons to deter U.S. intervention, something like that. So that's why I mentioned that strategy. And then second, you mentioned about the 9th Korean People's Army celebration. You said Kim Jong-un mentioned conventional capability. That's a really good example. So I would definitely add it on my paper. And thank you so much. And third, you mentioned about short-term conflict. Then probably you said like North Korea is also considering Plan B, which is inadvertent protracted war. Well, yeah, North Korea might prefer short-term conflict, but who never knows? Like the war, every country wants to finish the war in a very short, limited time. But like in the battlefield, not everything goes really well. So, but like I think North Korea will never ever be prepared for protracted war. So that's why they want to finish the conflict in a very limited time and with their all efforts. So, so like probably because of they don't have enough capability, so that's why they don't have Plan B. So that's my answer. And you mentioned about time frame. So okay, this is my paper is kind of a pilot paper thing. So well, I didn't really put high value on the setting up high time frame. So maybe I'll take your advice, and then like maybe I'll look into my paper again, and probably I will put some time frame. But I wanted to focus on some events on the conflicts with nuclear weapon states. I thought it's kind of striking trend that every conflict nowadays on the globe is related to some countries with nuclear weapons. But there were, it started with conventional weapons, and still they are fighting with conventional weapons, but they are not using nuclear weapons. They are just under the shadow of nuclear weapons. So that's what I wanted to focus on, and also okay, sorry. Okay, Dr. John also suggests me to identify the differences, lessons. So yes, I focused on the lessons for North Korea from the conflicts around the globe nowadays, and I think those lessons are helping to develop their the military strategy and developing the concept of modern warfare that they have. So it's all about the conventional and also nuclear thing as well. And last question that I want to answer is like, was that U.S. intervention part, implications and deployment thing. Okay, sorry. So okay, considering, I think, considering U.S. role in shaping strategies for modern warfare is also important. That's why I mentioned U.S. role as a mediator. Well, every step that North Korea makes, in that sense, North Korea probably thinks what U.S. will respond to North Korea's actions. So that's why I, I inserted the U.S. U.S. part as a mediator. So probably, yeah, that's it. I thank you so much for your comment.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Kim, for your comment. The first question here regarding the threat perception, whether it is true actually, because the things change all the time here, it's not something really constant. So the threat perceptions actually will be difficult to consolidate or even conceptualize here. But well, as far as I know, or according to my knowledge, to those people in China or the scholars that I can approach to talk to them, the threat that they perceive fundamentally would be only one, which is about the North Korean nuclear weapons, which associate with their national survival, or maybe some people put regime survival. And the Chinese government thinks that this is not something they can, offer, because it's the problem between North Korea and the United States. And this is also the reason why, as Chair Professor Park mentioned, that South Korea, sometimes they think that China is not very clear regarding what kind of attitudes or policies that you have towards North Korea. So that's why the logic here is, because the United States hasn't really solved the problem directly with North Korea, China has facilitated, China has contributed here, but because they haven't solved the problem, and then it led to the evolving, changing threat in the region, including those aftermath, including, let's say, no matter this is Obama, Joe Biden, and also Trump. But this is actually the Chinese, thinking, if I got it correctly from those people who I talked to in China, or the scholars, or even the think tanks who, some of them actually, if I refer to those two persons, they participated in the six-party talks before, so this is their perspective here. But definitely, I would also agree that threat perception should be much more, let's say, broadened, or maybe, let's say, enriched, so that we know much further the picture that we have. For example, Japan, South Korea, how could they think, and how could they, pose the challenges to China as well. The second comment regarding the Chinese soft intervention policy here, it's true that China sometimes seems to be deviate from its non-intervention policy. For example, you have the more high-level sanctions towards North Korea. But according to my framework, the highest level of the sanctions, or the comprehensive sanctions, there are level parts of that, what we call hard intervention. The hard intervention would be the Western scholars that conceptualize that we have mainly two: boycott, sanctions economically, and also direct military interventions to change the regime there. So China actually say no to those things. But China did have some sort of, very small, let's say, tougher economic policy, which I put in the medium level of the economic manipulations here. For example, they cut off the friendship bridge for 3 days so that you try to give a signal to North Korea. If you are not going to stop it, then we're going to, cut off your economy comprehensively. No tourists can visit to Pyongyang. Basically, China contributes most of those tourists to Pyongyang, and China also can cut off most of those oil shipped to Pyongyang here. But they, all the time, will be very cautious to do it, because they don't want to see any upset of the border between the two countries. The soft intervention policy here, my last word here is, they are very important in the sense that they want to differentiate between the United States and China. So let's say if the Chinese government is going to do everything the same with the United States, according to South Korea, according to Japan, the United States, China should cut off all the things with North Korea, and China should even support indirectly a kind of preemptive strike in North Korea. The first point here is it's not something fitting the Chinese national interest. The second point here is, if China has done all the things the same with the West, how can you keep that only channel, communication channel with North Korea? So I guess that this is why China also has its own dilemma in that sense. So regarding the last question here, the focal point of the paper here, I admit that this is a kind of a problem here, because you have many issues here. You have the Korean Peninsula peace and stability. You have the nuclear crisis here. And I guess that what I try to do is something, the ultimate peace and stability regarding how China can shape that regional order. But this paper actually would be part of that, testing, pieces regarding the North Korean nuclear crisis only. But then the second part, actually, I would come back to something about South Korea, which I just talk about this very briefly. But anyway, thank you so much for comment.
Well, thank you very much for your valuable comments. I really appreciate them. So I think that there were, broadly speaking, two questions. I'll answer the second question about extended deterrence first. So the question is there any, so how can the United States reassure its allies? I mean, is there a way to do it? Well, I mean, I talked about how the Trump presidency undermined the credibility of U.S. nuclear extended deterrence. But however, I mean, this issue is not new, right? I mean, the credibility of extended deterrence has been questioned over and over and over again, even during the Biden administration, which really went a great length to reassure South Koreans. The Washington Declaration is a pretty strong commitment by not only by establishing the NCG, but also deploying strategic assets like nuclear power, ballistic missile, submarines, and etc. And so I am really curious if there is actually a way to reassure South Koreans. So even if the United States deploys tactical nuclear weapons on South Korean soil, South Koreans will want the authority to use them. So if the United States doesn't share doesn't give South Korea delegate the authority to use nuclear weapons, I think the South Koreans will continuously question the credibility of extended deterrence. I'm not blaming South Koreans. I think that it is inherently difficult to trust that the president of another country would risk their people and cities to come to another country's aid. So when we talk about this, we often just say, as a sort of an afterthought, that we should enhance the credibility of extended deterrence. But just repeating this hollow mantra, I'm not really sure if it's going to be sustainable. Another question, I understand that we are really out of time, but another question about policy priorities in terms of deterring Russia and China. I don't really think that there is a clear policy priority now. That's why I mentioned that there are mixed signals. But I agree that this arms control approach is not going to work really because, I'm not really sure. I mean, of course, the United States and Russia, these, arms control mechanism between the two countries is sort of collapsing. But I think that I'm more optimistic about the chance of their, arms control negotiations. But when it comes to China has far fewer nuclear warheads than the United States. Why? So the problem is, the kind of, arms control will also, includes not only just numerical limitations, but also, like threat reduction. But the problem is the kind of arms control that the United States wants would be very, very different, would look very different from the kind of arms control deal that China would like to have. And then some other strategies and how do you deter Russia and China? If you ask this question to different American people, they will have different answers. Some advocate for sort of strategic, mutual, like accepting mutual vulnerability with China, which will lead to sort of a strategic equilibrium. But many sort of hardliners think that is almost like unpatriotic to make your country vulnerable to China's nuclear threats. And so I don't think that there is an agreement on this, and different leaders would have different policy priorities. But the goal is the same, right, in deterring China and Russia. But how to get there, I think there is no agreement. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Well, we have very productive and interesting discussion on nuclear order and nuclear proliferation. Well, the panel is supposed to be done by 4:20, but I think if you have any question, may I have one or two questions? Okay, please, Dr. Kim. Is there anyone who has the microphone? But this is simultaneously, on the air in YouTube. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for the wonderful panels. I learned a lot. I'll try to be very quick. So Dr. Bomi came first. So I understand that North Korea is not definitely interested in protected conflicts. I definitely understand that. But I'm not really sure, like maybe I wasn't convinced enough, maybe I didn't really clearly understand why they are rather, like they would ever want to focus on even quick conflict with their full effort. Like, can they actually expect the US is not gonna respond to them, retaliate? I mean, that is a very important issue. How the US is going to respond is going to be a very important implication to South Korea as well in honoring their extended deterrence. So like, I wanted to hear your thoughts about that. And Professor Lee, I have a quick maybe question and comment. So you use the word threat perception. Generally, that means like security threat perception about the security threats or concerns about the security threat. But is it really that China is considered, worried, concerned about the security threats? Or is it really kind of like they are not interested in changing the status quo, like as like the maintaining the influence over North Korea? I think the observable implication is maybe the same. But what exactly is the motivation? Is that the security threats? Or is that they are just not interested in losing their influence over North Korea? And Professor Lami Kim, I'll try to be really quick. So I definitely agree that President Trump, under the second administration, he has been sending the mixed signal. So I agree with that. And then I also agree with the concern that how are we going to, like, is the US ever going to reassure South Korea fully, right? But then I found it very interesting that, like, I kind of wanted to hear your perspective about, like, what happened to Iran, right? So so we are kind of perplexing about why President Trump bombed nuclear facilities in Iran. Is it really necessary, right? I'll be quick. But it's depending on what is the objective that President Trump is trying to achieve. Like, I kind of feel like it may be the case that he is using one stone and kill multiple birds, right? So like, it is possibly sending the message to North Korea. And also it is sending the messages to South Korea. So like, be careful. But we can also provide these extended deterrents. Like, we can respond to North Korea quickly. So like, I wonder whether like you thought about whether that is actually something like the President Trump has in mind as an implication and then sending a message to North Korea. Sorry.
Okay, 1 minute.
Well, North Korea wants to finish the war before the U.S. intervenes. I mean, North Korea has seen that United States intervenes with any sort of conflicts with nuclear weapons, the conflicts that nuclear weapon states is engaged in. So, so North Korea probably see that the United States will intervene just before the nuclear escalation occurs. So probably North Korea wants to, make a high intensity attack on South Korea before United States, thinking to intervene the conflict on the Korean Peninsula. That's why I say it. Thank you.
I cannot answer it. The question I cannot answer it, I guess. But honestly speaking here, because in China, starting from 2016 to now, there is a debate and continuous debate regarding whether they support North Korea or not. For some evidence, which I try to associate, but it doesn't mean that I know the answer. We have the using of the narrative regarding the national reconciliation between North and South Korea. And it seems like China, in other areas, including other regions, for example, Myanmar, they would like to, have stability, prosperity over the status quo. So it means that if the outcome is something about stability, prosperity, they won't mind if the status quo will be changed. But still, this is something very controversial, even within the Chinese scholars. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that, President Trump said it several times that, Iran should not have nuclear weapons, and that was the policy objective, and then he tried diplomacy. However, the negotiations were stalled, and he was getting really frustrated. And then if the goal was to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons, then I think the military preventive strikes is one of the ways to get there. I'm not really sure if, President Trump really had thought about like implications for North Korea or other, nuclear aspirants. It is possible to, that he was trying to send a message to the entire world that if you, try to push the nuclear weapons, that you will have to pay the price for it. However, if that was the intended objective, I'm not really sure if it will meet the objective, because we don't really know if President Trump in the United States was successful in dismantling Iran's nuclear program. But recent reports have indicated that it just only delayed the process by a few months. And if that's the case, I think that it's possible that other countries, like Iran will try to, rebuild its nuclear program, and other nuclear aspirants will try really hard to acquire nuclear weapons to prevent this kind of preventive attacks from happening. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Kwak Tae-han, you have 30 seconds. Sorry about that. Yes, I'm very sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Kim Bomi, Dr. Kim Lami, good to see you again. Bomi, Lami, this panel is excellent. I wish I had more time. I have a lot of questions, but the next panel, I'm going to ask this Patrick Cronin panel, if you have time to come in, and then that we have a new dialogue on continuing this subject. But my question is, actually, I want you to think about in the future on relating to the changing global order and nuclear proliferation. The proliferation that include South Korea nuclear armament. I thought that you're going to address these questions, but you haven't. Glad you haven't done that. My question is this: under what conditions will North Korean leader Kim Jong-un give up nuclear weapons? That's my question. Think about it. I have, my question is, he will give up under certain conditions.
Okay. Yeah.
That's all.
Thank you.
I want to say. Thank you very much.
Professor Kwak Tae-han, he raised questions such as under what condition Kim Jong-un may give up their nuclear program. We will have all the answer, try to have the answer in our mind. Actually, we live in the age of uncertainties, in particular related to many nuclear issues. I definitely hope all the complicated global nuclear problems sometime in the future may be solved by the suggestions and ideas raised today by the leading 6 scholars. Okay, I will close the panel. Thank you very much.